Rome enters the 180s looking indestructible. Marcus Aurelius leaves behind roads, order, and the feeling that the empire knows who it is. But when he dies, the calm begins to change shape. People don't riot, they hesitate. Then, in 193, hesitation turns into a full legitimacy crisis. Emperors come and go in a blur. The Senate splits into competing camps, and the Praetorian Guard and the legions learn a fatal lesson. They can decide who rules. The markets may still run, but the political center stops feeling permanent. Rome's stability doesn't collapse yet. It simply stops being guaranteed. After the chaos, Septimius Severus pushes Rome toward a simple survival strategy. Keep the army close, keep it paid, keep it loyal. It works, until it becomes habit. Commanders gain political weight, and loyalty starts to look like a budget item. Then, in 212, Caracalla expands citizenship across the empire, pulling millions inside the Roman legal identity. It sounds like unity, and in some ways it is. But the machine gets heavier. More administration, more records, more enforcement, and a larger tax structure to manage. Rome grows bigger on paper, while its political spine becomes more dependent on force. In 235, the pattern hardens into a new normal. Emperors rise and fall through military pressure, not civic consensus. Provincial leaders watch the center wobble and start thinking locally. Then the plague of Cyprian hits, an invisible enemy that attacks everything at once. People die, but so do supply chains, tax flows, and recruitment pipelines. Farms can't produce the same surplus, cities struggle to keep services running, and armies become harder to refill, exactly when border pressure doesn't stop. Rome isn't just dealing with bad leadership anymore. It's dealing with a system that's losing capacity year by year. By 260, the empire proves it can crack. The Gallic Empire breaks away in the west, and Palmyra rises in the east. Separate centers of power that exist because the main system can't reliably protect or pay. That's the terrifying precedent. Rome can be divided and still continue. Then Aurelian fights to pull the pieces back together, and for a moment it looks like recovery. But reunification doesn't restore the old Rome. It changes its instincts. Cities fortify. Defensive walls and controlled gates matter more than open civic life. The empire survives, but it begins to live like a state under siege, spending more to feel safe and getting less unity in return. Diocletian comes in with a different idea. If the empire keeps collapsing at the top, then redesign the system itself. Power is reorganized, responsibilities are formalized, and bureaucracy grows so the state can extract taxes, enforce rules, and keep armies supplied. It brings a kind of stability, engineered stability. But the economy is still under pressure. In 301, the Maximum Price Edict tries to freeze reality in place, controlling prices as if the market were a switch you can turn off. The problem is predictable. Goods vanish, black markets grow, enforcement invites corruption. Rome can force order on paper, but it can't force trust back into the street. Constantine reshapes the empire's idea of legitimacy. After securing power, he legalizes Christianity through the Edict of Milan, changing who holds moral authority, how loyalty networks form, and what rightful rule feels like. Then, in 330, he founds Constantinople and shifts the center of gravity east. Rome remains monumental, but monuments aren't decision-making. Money, administrators, and strategic attention relocate. The West doesn't collapse immediately, but it becomes the side that gets less priority, less investment, and less margin for the next wave of shocks. By the time of Valentinian I and Valens, the empire is effectively running in two halves. On paper, it's management. In reality, it's divergence. The West is more exposed and less resourced, yet it must defend long frontiers and handle internal instability. Then, in 395, when Theodosius I dies, the separation hardens into permanence. The East and West still call themselves Roman, but they stop behaving like one machine. Coordination weakens, priorities diverge, and the West begins living in a state of chronic emergency, always patching, rarely rebuilding. In 376, the Goths cross the Danube seeking entry and survival, and Rome tries to manage it through settlement and negotiation, the foederati system. But strained administration turns a management problem into a disaster. Shortages, exploitation, bribery, resentment. A border is not just a line, it's a logistics and trust system, and that system fails. Then comes Adrianople in 378. Emperor Valens is killed, and a major Roman field army is shattered. After this, the West negotiates from weakness. It relies more on deals with armed groups and more on forces it can't fully command. In 406, the Rhine frontier fails catastrophically, as groups like the Vandals, Alans, and Suebi cross into Gaul. Once a border becomes porous, the state loses control over where crises happen. Fires pop up everywhere, and resources are pulled in too many directions. Then, in 410, Alaric's forces sack Rome. The physical damage matters, but the psychological damage is worse. The eternal city was supposed to be untouchable. If Rome can be violated, provincial elites begin hedging, rivals gain confidence, and the empire's authority becomes harder to believe in. In 439, the Vandals take Carthage, and the Western Empire loses a financial and logistical lifeline: tax revenue, grain supply, and control of key sea routes. This isn't just territory, it's the budget that pays armies and maintains fleets. Without money, loyalty becomes negotiable. Without ships, the Mediterranean stops being a Roman highway and becomes contested space. The West can't afford prevention anymore, only reaction. By 476, Romulus Augustulus is deposed, and the Western imperial title becomes a formality. The buildings remain, but the machine is finished. No reliable taxation, no unified command, no consistent enforcement.